Welcome to the Growth Whisperers Podcast, where everything that Brad and I talk about 117 issues in a row is about building enduring great companies. And that's what we're passionate about. That's what we spend our lives working on with leaders and CEOs of companies that aspire to do that or something in that direction. I'm Kevin Lawrence, and I'm joined, as always, 117 times in a row with Brad Giles, my good friend down in Perth, Australia. Brad, how are things in Australia today?
Excellent. Rainy, wet, winter. God, it's freezing over here, I tell you. How are you doing?
You just took the words out of my mouth. It's June, and it's wet, freezing, and winter. Here, it feels like in Vancouver. Well, actually, I'm in a place just outside called Kelowna in the Okanagan. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Last year at this time, we had this thermal something where we were like scorching up and burning. And this year, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, I don't normally complain about the weather, but it's been getting to me recently. It's a little much. Anyways, before we dig into a topic today that's we're going to get a little spooled up about, what's your word of the day?
I'm thinking about the technology crash. Okay. And in particular, there are some companies whose valuations may have been, less based on reality and more based on things that aren't perhaps real.
Like hype? Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels very familiar to the year 2000 when we had the tech crash. So I don't know if it's just a word. It's just that's what's on my mind is there is an economic. No, you know why? Because in reading about it, they were saying that, funnily enough, they're not focused on growth. They're focused on the sustainability and how enduring a company could be. And so
imagine that.
When you're talking about what we do every week is talk about enduring great companies, I'm thinking about this article, and these companies may not endure because they were all hot air and hype.
Yeah. I think you just changed my word of the day.
I've never done that before.
You haven't done that. And it's hype. I was talking to a CEO last week, just catching up with a CEO, and they went to work for an organization as a paid CEO, and they had a rude awakening. What they found when they got there wasn't what they thought they signed up for. Turns out that the organization was more interested in the hype and the story than they were in building an enduring great company. And they thought this is a CEO that likes to build great companies, has done it in the past, but they were more about the hype and the stock than they were about actually doing something great. And they were very disappointed. And now they're, the good news is they're on the market looking for a new opportunity, and they'll quickly find one because they're a great CEO. But it's just like, be careful. There's a song, there's something in a rap song or something, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's about hype. It's not like beware the hype. It's way cooler than that. But it's hype. So what was your word? I got caught up in my word because you changed it on me. But what was your word?
Yeah, it wasn't a word. It was just.
That's why I didn't remember it.
Yeah, it was about enduring. Well, it was about enduring that the tech crash was all hot air, and you got to build something to endure.
It is, and it reminds me back in my days in the Middle East when I was working in Dubai for years, and I first went there in 2005, and like 07, 08, or 05, 06, 7, 08, when the market crashed, started there, it became 08, 09 in the world. It was like I couldn't, in 06, 07, I'm like, it just doesn't seem real. Too much hype. It's a lot of fundamentals to play. Anyway, awesome. Well, with that in mind, let's take that into what we're talking about today. And that's the problem with most flywheels. Jim Collins developed this thing called the flywheel he found in his research. And it was good to great. Yes, that good to great. And, and lots of people got excited about and try and built them or trying to build them. And there's some big problems with them that we've seen. But before we get further into that, hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast, and you can get the great versions of this that we put our hard work into every week. And if you are subscribed, please feel free to give it a rating. We prefer 5s. And if it's not great or there's a concern, please also send us a comment. Send us a note. We would love to hear from you and know how we can do better. And you can reach us, and the contact information is at the end. But anyways, please feel free to do that. All right. So getting into this thing, like Brad, like we're both lovers of the flywheel, and like any of Collins's concepts or any tool or discipline we bring to life in companies, doing a mediocre job of it's pretty easy. Doing a very good job of it's hard. Doing a great job, it's a lot of work. A lot of work, but doing anything well is work. So Collins talks about the flywheel in his monograph. It's a great guide. But we're going to dig more into this today because after working with dozens of companies through this, and we've done, in private sessions with companies, after private sessions with Jim, we've done work with them to help them dial it in with our clients or people that we help. It's hard to really, get it right. And we're going to dig into the things that make it so that they're not right. Now, next week, we're going to do so this is episode 117. Next week on episode 118, we're going to talk about, once you know it's right, how do you spool this thing up and get this thing firing to build a lot more momentum in your business? But that's next week. So Brad, do you want to kick us off into kind of the first of the main things that make it hard to get these things right?
Well, I would start by saying that goals are garbage. And what do I mean by that? A goal it's just a guess. It's just, you're just throwing something out there. But when you get a goal,
garbage, or you threw me there. Go ahead.
When you get a goal with a plan, then it's worth something. So we're going to achieve $50 million in revenue in 3 years' time is worthless. Once you put that with, and this is how we're going to get there, that's more valuable. But then when you do the work behind that as well, there's even more value to it. Okay. So flywheels look simple. Like they're even drawn in pencil in Jim Collins' monograph.
Yes.
To rather than, on a computer, they're even drawn in pencil to make them seem even more simpler.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But it is the depth of understanding of all of the things that are in there that enables that level of simplicity. You couldn't just draw the Amazon flywheel today and expect, because we've drawn the flywheel, we are now destined for success. It's all of the pre-work that occurs, all of the understanding that matters. So flywheels must be simple, but not too simple. And what that means is, just because you've drawn some phrases and you've drawn an arrow between them in the shape of a circle, it does not build momentum in your business. And that's why it's called a flywheel, because a flywheel builds momentum.
Yes. And it's almost like, it's like dynamite. The components of dynamite are very, very simple. Now, I can't name them. I'm not an expert. But the components of dynamite and the concept of dynamite is very simple. And you light a wick at the end and it burns and explodes, and it can crack open big chunks of rock and move and basically break down chunks of mountain. Very, very simple. But it's hard. It took a lot of experimentation and work to get it right. And it takes a lot of work to ensure that it's safe and effective as it's supposed to be. So all powerful things are simple, but getting to that point where it truly is powerful, because if you get a few of the ingredients wrong and you're making some dynamite, one, it could be a dud and do nothing, or you could die, right? So simplicity is hard and incredibly powerful. And flywheels, like we've seen a bunch. At first glance, they look good. We've drafted some that at first glance look good. We come back to them and look at them later. Well, wait a second, that doesn't work. Like, you go back and debate it, And so to get it so that it is very, very powerful, yeah, it's hard. It's very hard.
We've seen so many flywheels, and we've seen a lot where we've just looked at it and said, there is no way in the world that will build momentum. Like, that is just a series of statements.
Yeah.
And that's what really prompted us to start talking about this episode. So the second point is that, as I just said, flywheels must build momentum. And in order to stress test your flywheel, there's one really simple way to stress test it. And that is, we can't help but. It's a phrase that tests each stage. So if at the 12 o'clock position, you have a statement, and then there's an arrow going to the second part of your flywheel, that arrow should say, we can't help but, or that's what that intimates. And so if you say step one and then step two, and you're not saying we can't help but, it's not a logical extension that will be the outcome of the first action, well, you're not going to build momentum.
And that's hard because you need on every single step, one, something happens and it can't help but do this. And because that happens, it can't help but. So it's almost like, you ever see those videos of people laying out dominoes?
Yeah.
Right? And you'll see dominoes and they'll go around a whole room and there'll be ramps and there'll be like balls rolling down to the next one. It's like this domino falls into this one. It can't help but knock it over, which falls into the next one, but it can't help but knock it over. I mean, again, that's very simple, but that is the concept. If it doesn't drive or power the next piece, then you haven't quite got it. And that's a very high bar. Now, does it need to be 99.9% perfect? No, but it needs to have an incredibly strong correlation or relationship with, or even going back to cause and effect. This one causes an effect on the next one.
Have you heard of the phrase, build it and they will come?
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
that's not true.
Well, you can't apply that thinking here. You can't just say, no. if we do something at one part of the flywheel, well, of course customers will come, because it must be predicated by the prevailing logic of the previous step.
Right. It's like, if we build a great restaurant, they will come. That's not how it works.
No, they won't. Maybe if
there's another piece, and I just searched this up. There's another piece that Jim gets deep. I remember him saying this in one of our sessions. But what he talks about is along the right side, it converts into fuel, right? It's fuel, and it adds a layer of complexity, which is the opposite of simplicity. I'm just pulled this up off an article.
I remember.
Go ahead, you're laughing.
I remember him saying that on the right-hand side is where you put in the effort, and then on the left-hand side, as you're looking at it, so let's say 6, 9, and 12 p.m. if it was a clock, that's where it outputs money or energy or something like that.
Yes, what it is that the right side, actually, he says it's how you actualize your purpose in the world. The left side is how it converts into fuel. I'm looking at a transcript here. And fuel is economies of scale, reputation, or building resources. Point of it being, and again, that's just another lens on it. In no matter what, go ahead.
The reason that I was laughing is because I ran it with an engineering company, and they all looked at me like I was the dumbest person in the room. And they said, of course, that's exactly what flywheels do. The right side and the left side. So
really?
Yeah, that's
okay. Oh, hey, a lesson from the engineer. So getting back to it, the idea is we can't help but is the critical piece that is broken in some of these flywheels that we look at. It's a bunch of great ideas, but one does not necessarily drive the rest or have a substantial impact on the rest. That is the hard part. And that is the acid test to go around your flywheel and see if it's true.
Yeah. So let's give you an example of how that translates into Amazon. We all know Amazon. So this is the Amazon flywheel example from Jim Collins' book. So point number one is lower prices on more offerings. If we achieve that, we can't help but increase customer visits because we've got lower prices on more offerings. So that means that there will be more people who come to our online store. If we increase customer visits, we can't help but attract third-party sellers because we've got a bigger audience of customer visitors. More third-party people will want to come onto our site. And if we attract third-party sellers, we can't help but expand our store and extend our distribution. That's another logical step. If we do that, we can't help but grow revenues per fixed costs, which is the harvesting, the fuel for the engine that you just mentioned. And then if we do that, this is at kind of 8, 9, 10 o'clock, we can't help but, and then we go back to 12 o'clock, lower prices on more offerings. And that's building momentum. So the stress test, the simple thing is we can't help but.
And if you take that last one, we grow revenues per se, so we make more money based on the assets we have running or the fixed costs we have, right? And that gives us additional profitability, which directly enables us. It doesn't automatically lower prices. It gives us the ability to lower prices because we've got more spread between revenue and costs. And so because we lower prices, it's easier to increase customer. We can't help but get customer. We have more attractive pricing because we have more people. We can get other people who want to sell to them because there's more people to sell to, and because we got more people selling stuff, we got a bigger store and we can extend our distribution, which means we get more volume over the fixed cost. Which again, it's amazing. So it's a very, very good, and I would say potentially not perfect, but it's a 9 point something out of 10, and they executed it relentlessly, which is what we'll talk about in next week's show, about how do you fully execute this relentlessly to fully maximize the power.
And so the power, again, of we can't help but, as a simple stress test, anytime you look at someone's proposed flywheel or yours, if you can't say that, like, it explains what will logically follow, that it's about building momentum. Again, the reason it's called the flywheel is because flywheel momentum is what we want. That flywheel momentum, it continues to grow the business organically once we get these components right.
It does, and you become a force to be reckoned with. And ideally, you get to the point where it's such a force that your competitors get very, very unhappy, and it's hard to compete with you because you're so good. I'll give you an example. When we go and do health checks on the flywheels, which again, we'll talk about a little bit next week about how we're living them. We find, like, one company we went through this, and is that we went through and rated where they were at. What they realized is, even though they had it right, they had underinvested in one area dramatically, which dramatically hurt their success. And even by looking at that one underinvestment, even validated that we nailed the flywheel, because they could see what happened to because their growth had stalled. It wasn't like it used to be. Anyway, really powerful, just hard to do. Another example of a company. This is one out of the US when we nailed theirs. I mean, man, did we nail it? And it was so simple, but it was the one slide that the CEO used to share the vision of the company with everybody, and just made it, because here's how we work. Because we do this, we do this, we do this. Everyone could see their role in it and how they help to speed it up. Because the idea here is get it right once you nail it and speed it up so we have more momentum. Anyway, it's very powerful. So the fifth one that you got here is that they are simple, but they tie back into other critical stuff, or at least work in sync with, like the hedgehog. Right, the hedgehog has your purpose, your profit per X, and what you can be the best in the world at. Now, I remember in one session, and I don't think that's the permanent way that Jim does it, but he had actually talked about it being at the center of your flywheel, because it's like your strategy, it's your what you primary focus would be, and the flywheel being the drivers around that. So I've always in my mind visualized it. Hedgehog in the middle of the hedge. So it's a BHAG is in the middle. Hedgehog has the BHAG in the middle and the flywheel rotating around it as just an image of the way that I like to pull it together. But anyway, so you got to, having your hedgehog in the middle of it. And Brad, why don't you talk about how you use smack with some people on the flywheel as well?
Yeah, SMAC is specific, methodical, and consistent recipe for success, again, from Jim Collins. So before you try to build a flywheel, you've got to understand your hedgehog, you've got to understand your SMAC recipe, and you've also got to understand the marketplace and business model and customer opportunities. So the SMAC recipe is a list of items. It's the do's and do nots that is drawn from your successes and disappointments. So, one of the ones I love is an IT technology company. And one of the items on their SMAC recipe says, "We do not work for lawyers or doctors." Now, obviously, they've had a problem providing IT services to those people, and it resulted in disappointments. And they said, "We don't do that." Another one they had was, "We only work in a 50-kilometer radius of our office." So maybe 50-mile. But the point being, it's a specific list of success. It's the recipe for success. So you've got to understand your purpose, how you make money, profit per X, and what you can do better than any other organization. You've got to understand your SMAC recipe. You've got to understand, again, the marketplace, business model, and customer opportunities before you build that, because all of those things provide deep insights into your flywheel.
And on top of it, you need a bunch of time, because to get a good draft of it is one thing. And then to revise it with in mind, we can't help but in mind to get it so it's actually it. Sometimes it's a serious investment of time to get it right. Some people, it comes easier than others for whatever reason. But all of that and a bunch of time with smart brains chipping away at it, different perspectives, super powerful. So that's really the points about the mistakes with flywheel. The main thing, if we go back to the points, is they need to be simple but not simplistic or too simple. Some people just have a bunch of things where there's not a strong correlation or cause and effect between the pieces. And the flywheel is about building momentum. One thing generates a lot of power or in many cases, resources to the next. It's got to build momentum and pass the we can't help but stress test. And then Brad, walked us through the Amazon flywheel, which is a very great and simple example. And it's easy for us to see it as we've experienced it. And it's why a lot of us might, today I was looking for a table that I needed for an event. First thing was Amazon, and away I went, right? Simple, get it done, got it ordered, don't even have to go to a store. Of course, Amazon had it. And of course I can get it in 2 days because it's Amazon. Brad, do you want to cover the other ones there?
Sure. So the power of we can't help but, it's logical. And then finally, flywheels are the simple output of deep insights into hedgehog, SMAC, and the marketplace, business model, and customer opportunities that you can find. So with that, good episode today, digging into the biggest problem with most flywheels, and it is, I guess we've left it until the end. The biggest problem is that you can't say we can't help but. They don't have that logical flow to build that momentum. So that's the simple way to stress test your flywheel. Okay, so good episode today. Hope you've enjoyed it. As always, Kevin has a newsletter that is quite interesting about all of the topics building enduring great companies. And you'll find him and his newsletter at lawrenceandco.com. My name is Brad, and I can be found with my newsletter at evolutionpartners.com.au. Of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to like our podcast, and you can see us on YouTube as well. And I think that's about it. I hope that you have a great week and look forward to next week's episode where we're digging into the second part of the flywheel. So if you've solved the problem, now we're talking about how to power up your flywheel, episode 2 of 2. Look forward to chatting to you next week.
Have a great one.